Hi, my name is Jeff Pagano, and welcome to Harpin On Rugby, where with the help of some fellow fans, I get the chance to harp on what's going on with Leinster, Ireland, the Lions, and the wider rugby world. Joining me this week is someone earning his 10th Harpin cap. Welcome back to Mr. Hugo Gordon.
Thanks for having me back on, Jeff.
No problem. Great to have you as always. Okay, well, listen, we're going to start in Lisbon, where Paul O'Connell's Ireland squad finally rounded off their season in spectacular fashion, with test records breaking all over the shop as Ireland posted 16 tries, defeating Portugal by 106 points to 7. Definitely what you could call a cricket score. I mean, where to begin with a dominant result like that, Hugo?
Yeah, look, I think going into the game, you're expecting Ireland win. You were hopefully expecting a comfortable Ireland win. I don't think anyone saw us breaking our record going back to 2000 when we beaten the US 83-3. 106-7 is a scoreline you don't often see in rugby, and for the better. But it was from basically the opening moment, it was one-way traffic. Not even going to attempt to go through all the various scores and things that happened. But if you just run through kind of the list of try scorers, starting with the kind of the first minute when McCluskey went over in the left corner, Hugh Gavin scored twice, Tommy O'Brien scored twice, Shane Bolton scored twice, Cian Prendergast scored twice. We had tries from Tom Clarkson, tries from Craig Casey, Calvin Nash, Kieran Frawley, Alex Candellin, Ben Murphy, and then a penalty try to top it off at the end. I think the longest we went without scoring, I think there was about a 12-minute patch in the first half and then another 10-minute patch in the second half where we didn't score. Beyond that, we were scoring literally every few minutes, including one section. We were 28-0 up after 13 minutes. I mean, kind of Portugal were, we should say they were ranked 18th in the world going into this weekend. They are not the side that looked so brilliant at the World Cup in 2023. They've had a bit of a disappointing couple of years. They had a few players leave after that World Cup. Still got some very, very good players in that team, including Nicholas Martins, who scored their try. But they hadn't played a game in 4 months, and I think it showed. They were rusty. They were all over the place. They really didn't show much at all. It was a training game really for Ireland within 20 minutes. But as Paul O'Connell said after the game, you can only beat what's in front of you. And the best teams, when up against weak opposition, will put them to the sword. And it was really pleasing to see Ireland do that. And to see a few young players really hold their hands up. I mean, I'll start with, it's easy to forget that he is still a young player, but Craig Casey, captain the side on this tour, brilliant again. This tour has been his kind of opportunity to shine, to show himself in a leadership role, to show himself as the kind of the guy who is the next man up when Gibson Park is no longer at that level. And I've got no concerns about Casey's ability to do that. He was brilliant again, all day yesterday, provided real kind of zip around the field, scored a try for himself. Absolutely brilliant. Tommy O'Brien now on to 4 tries after 2 games, admittedly again against weak opposition, but that's something else. Shane Bolton, I thought was immense. He was very unlucky not to have at least 3 tries, if not 4. A couple of good kind of tackles of the death, stopping him from getting there. Hugh Gavin, I put on Blue Sky when he scored his first try that thus begins the Hugh Gavin era. I think he's going to be a player who is going to dominate the scene for a long, long time to come. He's been exceptional at underage level. He seems to have made that step up to senior level so impressively. And he's someone I'm really excited about, but also seeing the likes of Alex Candellin, Ben Murphy, get tries on, if not their debut, then their second game in Ben Murphy's case. It's really good to watch. No matter who the opposition is, a national record win is something else. It's the first time we've ever scored over 100 points. The first time we've ever scored 16 tries. It's the most successful conversions. Jack Crowley with 12 conversions. Some of them very difficult. He opened with 3 from the touchline. It's really, there's been a lot of talk about the current kind of cohort of Irish stars beginning to age out. This Ireland team has, I think it's fair to say, been on a bit of a decline over the last year or so since the World Cup. And we've seen over the last few years how impressive the under-20 teams have been. And there's always a question about whether that kind of step up will then happen, whether you'll see those players then kind of deliver on that promise at senior level. And it's not a given. It's not an easy thing to do. And it doesn't happen for a lot of players. But yesterday was a real sign that there are some incredibly talented young players coming up through this team. They're already gelling very well together. They already look like, there's quite a few of these players who, if you were to tell me, okay, tomorrow they got a slot into the the kind of the first Irish side, you'd say, well, that's fine. You know, I'm kind of happy enough. They look like they can do that. So immensely pleasing. It's kind of, it's hard to know what to say. It's almost, you know, it kind of, you almost felt a little bit bad for Portugal in the aftermath, but it was a lethal showing. I do wish we had another game coming up. It's a real shame the Romania game didn't happen. There's a few more players, a few more combos I would have liked to have seen. We haven't seen Paddy McCarthy, Steve Smith, or Nathan Doak on this tour, and that is a shame. But it's still 9 caps. We've handed out nearly as many caps over the last 2 weeks as we have in the previous 2 years. I think that is a bit of kind of blooding that did need to happen. I'm hoping it's the kind of start now of beginning to bring some of that new blood through as we look to kind of build towards the World Cup in 2027. But look, you can't be unhappy with 106-7. It was some showing, kind of a pretty famous night, all told, even if it wasn't necessarily the most meaningful of games. And yeah, very excited to see where these players go next.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at it, this time last year, we had our last game, last test match of the season, and Kieran Frawley came off the bench, and that's it. When it comes to comparisons, two completely different test match is completely different in terms of being as a contest. But still, you know, listen, yeah, you can. I mean, there's only so much you can say. You can reading out the try scores. I was almost hearing the "We Didn't Start the Fire" music going in the background as you're reeling off the names of the players. But no, it was compelling. You know, when they got the first couple of tries, we were thinking, you know, we usually think, oh, maybe we say 50 burger, whatever, you know, and then I think someone in the WhatsApp group, maybe it was me, said they could maybe get a couple here. So when they got past their 50 at halftime, you figure, like, will they get the 100? So you keep watching, thinking they're going to get it, and they, you know, it came close at the end, but they got a penalty, and it was a line out, Maul over the line. They collapsed the ball, penalty try. There it is. So it was compelling viewing, despite if it wasn't really much of a contest. Portugal didn't do themselves a lot of favors. They were missing players, like you said. And they lost another one. Appleton was probably one of their strongest in a key position as well in the center. They lost him, so I hope he comes back. A few question marks on the presentation front from Portugal's point of view. It wasn't a great, it was hardly a Champions League stadium that Portugal would have, and it wasn't nowhere near sold out. And then they had that TMO fail where they literally had no TMO in the game. You'd expect them to get that kind of right. It was a real amateurish kind of feel to it. But from Ireland's point of view, I think you're right. They could have done with that third test next week. But this has been a really good, perfect chance. For all I've said about the Lions, and that maybe I'm getting a bit apathetic towards these Lions tours, this particular one has taken so many players out of this Ireland squad. It's been a perfect chance to get players like you say, Hugh Gavin. It took a call up for him to get into the starting lineup, and he took that with both hands. And Craig Casey showing his leadership. So I think he's pretty much nailed down a definite squad spot. But then again, Ben Murphy has come on and showed himself really well. I think it's been good for him to be on the tour, to be training and pulling on the jersey and stuff. So it's not, you know, there's still a lot to learn despite the big score lines. I mean, just conceding one try in both matches haven't really been tested defensively in either match, but still the whole experience has been good. And there's really not a lot more you can say, is there? Okay, well, before we return to the pod, first a little reminder of all the different places you'll find us in the Rugger sphere, like on TikTok, where we've been doing previews for the Lions, along with Mark Jackson. To get access to all our latest content, as well as our presence on all the different social media platforms, you can bookmark us at linktree/Harpin On Rugby. As ever, please be sure to comment, like, share, and subscribe as needed. Okay, so now we turn our attention to Adelaide, Australia, where the Lions only scored half as many tries as Ireland, but it was still a handy winning margin, 48-0 over the hybrid Aussie and Kiwi squad. Did Andy Farrell learn much from this one, Hugo?
I think he will have learned some things. I actually think it's given him some potential selection headaches, which is always a good thing. I think this game, look, again, the opposition were not good in this game. Some good players on that team for sure, but they'd been together a few days, scratch side, and they looked like they'd probably spent more time in the pubs than on the training pitch over the last few days. So look, opposition is what it was. The Wallabies will be a much sterner test, but there were a few players who would have been going into this game knowing that it was their last chance to hold their hand up before that first test next weekend. From an Irish perspective, the big one, obviously, Hugo Keenan starting at 15. With Blair Kinghorn potentially being injured for that first test, it kind of remains to be seen whether he will miss it. But Hugo Keenan is now kind of in pole position to start that game. But he hadn't played a lot of rugby recently. The one game he played recently against the Waratahs, he had looked a little bit rusty, so he kind of needed a big performance. And he gave it. His first kind of touch of the ball in the game was to send a lovely kick through that led to a good Lions attack in their half. And then shortly later on, he had the presence of mind to spot a quick line-out opportunity that led to Duhan van der Merwe going over in the left corner for the first try. It was Hugo Keenan, at doing what we've seen Hugo Keenan do so well for so long, but which we haven't maybe seen as much from this season. A really, really solid performance. Assuming Kinghorn is injured for that first test, it does look like Keenan will start that game. And I don't think anyone will be too concerned about that on this basis. Then you had the center pairing of Sione Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones. Going into this game, and even kind of halfway through this game, I still thought that it would be Gary Ringrose at 13 and Bundyaki at 12 for that first game. Partway through the game, I think literally in the middle of the game came the news that Gary Ringrose was probably going to miss that, which has been confirmed because he's got a concussion. And that makes the likelihood of a Hugh Palazzo centre partnership for that first test more likely. And again, I'd have no concerns about that on this basis. Both Sione and Hugh Jones were excellent. Hugh Jones had a real stormer of a game. Not only great in attack, and some of his transition attack is so good, but a key turnover on the line. On the line, he was excellent in defence as well. So I do think we'll see those the three players in the starting lineup next week, particularly if those injuries do turn out to be as believed. A few other players who I thought were very good: Ben White, Scott Cummings off the bench, Jack Morgan, Ben Earl, Pollock, Mac Hansen. I think all will have. Again, this is where the kind of selection headache thing comes in. They'll have given Farrell some things to think about. I think those players are in slightly more challenging positions just because of the competition they have with some of the other players in those positions, particularly those players in the back row. But I think they all were very impressive. And I do think that they will have done their chances of being in the team next week no harm. The big question for me is whether Ty Byrne makes that squad. Ty Byrne is one of the best players in the world. He is one of the first names on the Ireland team sheet. The guy also looks absolutely exhausted. He has played an enormous amount of rugby this year for a forward. He's been kind of really carrying a lot on his shoulders. And he's played an awful lot of rugby on this tour. Personally, I think too much rugby on this tour. He doesn't look like himself. He just looks a little bit off the pace. I'd have loved it if he actually hadn't played this game, if we just wrapped him in cotton wool and stuck him in a hammock somewhere for the next 2 weeks. He wasn't bad yesterday by any stretch of the imagination, and he was pulled at the 50-minute mark. But the question is whether, with some other players really playing well in that back row, you got Ollie Chesham in particular, who I think is threatening for that position. I don't think Byrne will start next week. I think Atoje and McCarthy have the second row locked up, and I think they're probably better options at 6. Question for me is whether he features. I think he still will, but there is a real challenge to that position now. And just kind of one other mention before we move on to a couple of other Lions announcements, but for Pierre Schoeman, who went 80 minutes yesterday, which is not something that a prop is often asked to do. I suspect that is because Farrell wanted to kind of rest Andrew Porter as much as possible ahead of next week. But Schoeman was excellent. He emptied the tank for 80 minutes. He's some player. One of the things about these kind of selections where ultimately there is only a limited number of spots available on the pitch, but it means the good players are sometimes not going to get selected. I don't think Schoeman's going to make the squad next week, but he couldn't have done more yesterday to really hold his hand up on that one. And then, obviously kind of a couple more announcements on people being called up to the Lions yesterday and this morning. We had confirmation that Jamie George has been called up after Lucan Dickey was injured in the game yesterday. Personally, I think Jamie George should have been on the plane in the first place. I think he's an incredible player, and he was the obvious next call up. And then the kind of more surprising one this morning was Tom Clarkson, and there's been already quite a lot of talk about this on social media. And it is a bit of a surprise given that there wasn't an injury to any of the tight heads. But my sense is that Andy Farrell's looking at that upcoming midweek game against Pacifica First Nations 15 and thinking, I don't want to I don't want to risk any of my tight heads that I currently have in that game. I think he's particularly thinking of Tadhg Furlong, whose minutes I'm assuming he's looking to manage. So Clarkson comes in. He's had a really excellent end to the season. There were some other options, Joe Hayes and Asher Apoku-Forger in particular. I think Clarkson will be a great fit in there, and it's great news for him to get that call. I'd be surprised if he plays a test, but it'll be great for him to be on that tour. So I think a positive few days in Lions Land, a week to kind of rest up now ahead of the first test. Be interesting to see where the final calls go there, but I think we've got a pretty good idea based on the team that lined up against the Brumbies, and then a few who held up their hand yesterday about where that team is going to go. But we'll find out later this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this particular game in itself was a perfect example of what happens when you throw a bunch of players together that weren't playing together all season. You got one group that's actually been together now for 5 weeks. They were thrown together, and there was combinations working well. There was that magic word, cohesion. There was all that. You could see it throughout the team, throughout the match. The other guys, not so much. They were, there's a lot of players who will know each other, but there's Australians, there's New Zealanders. It's an unfamiliar surrounding. They were thrown together, like you say. They may not have been taking it as seriously as they might have, but then they're professionals when they're on the pitch and the tries are going in the other end and they're not scoring themselves. The discipline started to wane. I think the ref maybe sort of let them away with a lot. We didn't see a yellow card until well into the second half, I think it was. And I think there might have been some calls earlier on in a more conventional game. But again, same as the Ireland, we were saying about the Ireland game, you can only play what's in front of you. And there were a lot of players putting their hands up for those key positions. I think 6, and I suppose in following from that 20 as well, they're fascinating calls. Even 19 you could throw into that as well. Fascinating calls. There's lots of different ways they can go with that. I agree with you. I think Tadhg Beirne, I think he probably should be involved, but probably on the bench. 19 or 20 would probably suit him better. I think, yes, Chessum has definitely played his way into contention for that 6. It's a great line-out option as well. But there's a lot of talking points. One other number I was going to ask you about, if you have any thoughts, the 23. There's a lot of different ways you can go, and that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I genuinely don't know where that's going to go. I think if I had to pluck a name out of the air as who I think is kind of the most likely, and I definitely am not certain on this at all, I do think it'll be Mac Hansen. Mm-hmm. He was 23 against the Brumbies. He played very well at the weekend, was everywhere. While he is a winger, he can be employed as a fullback if needed. And the way Farrell used him, he actually brings him in off the wing a lot to act as a kind of almost a second centre at times. Now, I don't think he'll be played in the centres, but he does add a little bit of versatility there. It could be Bundy Aki, who Farrell definitely has form for using off the bench. So much, I think, depends on how the rest of the team lines up. I think if Ringrose had been in, I think it kind of shifts around some of the kind of possibilities on the bench. I think a lot depends on whether it is Marcus Smith who will be on the bench as well. Marcus Smith can obviously cover fullback and has played more at fullback on this tour than he has at fly half. Owen Farrell had a nice little cameo off the bench. It would certainly be an interesting choice if he were to be brought straight into the squad, but there is always that option. So it is really hard to tell how that one's going to go. At one point, actually, I figured that Blair Kinghorn or Elliot Daly would be the kind of the best options for maybe a 6-2 bench for all that they can bring there. Both players now probably injured. Well, Daly definitely injured and Kinghorn probably injured for that first test. So my guess is Hansen. I would not at all be surprised to see a different name when the squad is announced.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, like you say, the sort of mixed news for the Leinster contingent. I mean, it would be absolutely a crying shame if Ringrose doesn't get a test start, I think, in this series. I hope, like you say, it's a concussion. Hopefully that's just for a week. And he might be back in contention. But of course, Hugh Jones comes on and plays the Stormer in the first test. Be hard to replace him, but we'll see how that goes. But then, of course, you got the call-ups. You saw Jamie Osborne called up, and then Clarkson gets the call. What a year for him. I mean, he was third string. You'd probably say he was the third string Leinster tight head at the start. And then he goes on and he scores in the URC final. He gets an Ireland call-up before that. And now he's going to the Lions. And I think that is a wise call. We've got this sort of niggly, it's almost a nuisance extra game during the week now. And they got to cobble together a team for that. And it's like going to be a cotton wool 15 big time for the midweek match. So we'll see how that goes. But a great experience for Clarkson for sure. Hard luck on Cowan Dickey. I thought he was doing okay. But like you say, Jamie George, I just, as much as I like Ronan Kelleher, I was just thinking Jamie George, if he's wearing that 16, if you're looking for tries, you want someone on the bench, you come on, you get a penalty midfield, you put it in the corner, who's going to nail, especially someone like Itoje, who's going to hit that mark. And Jamie George is just the man for that. And also, speaking of someone in the last moments of a tight game, I think Mac Hansen kind of fits that mold as well. He pulls something out of nothing. He's kind of a YouTube moment kind of player as well. And he looks, I mean, they've all shown their keenness to get in this team, but I think being in Australia and all this, I think he's kind of extra keen to want to get into that side to play in Australia. So we'll see what happens there. There's a lot of different ways it can go, but listen, it's been a fascinating series. Duhan got a hat trick here. We haven't even mentioned that because I call them all tap-ins. I think I'm nothing against him as a player. He scored some incredible tries, especially against England in the Six Nations. So we're not going to fault him for that. But just when you compare him to James Lowe and you look at the 80-minute performance, if you took your average left winger, you would probably put Duhan before them, but Lowe is just he offers so much more. And for every try that Duhan scored in this game, there was an incident where you're going, oh my God, what is he doing? As well. So I think you could look at the highlights of the game, but just show the tries. You go, oh yeah, Duhan must be in contention to start next week. But that's not how the game is played. But listen, it was a fascinating game, not exactly close, a bit like the Ireland game, but a lot of questions answered, but a lot more questions asked, which is, I suppose, what you want from the Lions tour. So I suppose that's about all that can be said about that. Okay, so we're going to leave it there for this pod. Many thanks for joining me, Hugo. Thanks a million. We'll probably talk to you again soon.
Thanks very much, Jeff.
No problem. And but now we're going to go on to chat a bit longer about the other test matches from the weekend. To catch that, stay tuned to our YouTube channel. That should be up on Tuesday morning. Like I said, do check us out on TikTok during the week where we'll be covering the Lions' final outing before the first test. And in the meantime, stay safe, everyone. Slán.